We're in the middle of Computer Science Education Week. And why is that notable? Because without computer science, we wouldn't have smartphones, smart thermostats, smart appliances, smart homes even. And with the energy landscape quickly changing, technology is rapidly evolving. And that's going to allow homes to have multiple sources of electricity and backup storage. But thankfully, we have one of the industry's foremost subject matter experts on advanced energy technology with us. Brad Wills from Schneider Electric is here to explore the advancing sector of smart home energy systems, including the optimization of energy harvesting, usage, monitoring, storage, and load shifting. And he'll also tell us how these systems can increase sustainability, resiliency, comfort, and cost savings for homeowners. Now, over the last 28 years, Brad Wills has served in many roles, including market research, product management and development, segment sales management and marketing, channel management, U.S. marketing operations, and new business startup. Now, in his latest role as Director of Strategic Customers and Programs, Brad is responsible for strategic development and execution of all the go-to-market and business programs for Schneider Electric's home and distribution business. Now, we've called in another expert to facilitate the discussion. That's Sarah Gutterman. She's the co-founder and CEO of Green Builder Media. Sarah is a former venture capitalist and graduated cum laude from Dartmouth College and holds an MBA in entrepreneurship and finance from the University of Colorado. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this webinar is brought to you by Schneider Electric. They are driving the digital transformation of modern homes with smart and sustainable energy solutions for ultimate comfort and energy efficiency. Their connected home ecosystem of smart energy management solutions provides digital controlled energy use throughout a home, from the grid via their smart electrical panel to their connected wiring devices. This grid-to-plug solution makes it significantly easier to create smart, solar power and backup power ready homes, both now and in the future. Now, we're going to be taking your questions today as well. Simply use that questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, which is probably located on the right side of your screen. I'll review those questions and I'll pose them to our dynamic duo during the Q&A time set aside after their conversation. Sarah, I'm going to hand the proceedings over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike. It's always a pleasure to be here with you and our production manager, Mary Castaner, who is our wizard behind the curtain. Mary, thank you for making everything happen. And then, of course, everyone from Green Builder Media's network, really appreciate your time. I get to play a really fun role today. Sometimes I present, but today I'm actually even more excited because I get to ask questions of one of my favorite people in the industry, Brad, who is not just with Schneider Electric, which is a company that's just, on really the leading and bleeding edge of innovation, but Brad just has such a nice way of articulating these very advanced concepts and kind of boiling down the capabilities and functionality of really complex products and systems and technologies into understandable messages and storylines and use cases. So I'm excited to learn from Brad today. And just so everyone knows, I know when you registered for the webinar, we had Brad and a colleague of his, Ansul. Unfortunately, Ansul is ill and can't join us today. So Brad's stepping up to lead the charge, and hopefully I can help fill in a little bit. But I think that I want to kick off the conversation today just simply by saying that we're in such an incredibly exciting moment of time. The quickening pace of our climate emergency has made our collective goal on a global scale really crystal clear, and that's reaching full-scale elimination of carbon emissions. And this transition to the decarbonization economy will really require a complete overhaul of our socioeconomic system. And we really won't be able to shoehorn sustainability into old systems, which means that we have this rare and quite thrilling opportunity to redesign our economy at a scale and a scope that equals the transformation brought about by the Industrial Revolution, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, because it's the Industrial Revolution that's kind of caused this current climate crisis. But again, very exciting times. And, while recent climate reports issued by the United Nations and scientists across the globe are soberingly dire. Fortunately, many of the best minds in business and NGOs and across the globe are focused on innovative solutions that will facilitate the transformation to a cleaner and greener and better world. And kind of getting to net zero will require innovation and imagination at really a new kind of scale, with strategies ranging from very simple nature-based solutions like planting trees for carbon sequestration, all the way through to the development and deployment of complex enabling technologies, some of which we'll hear about today. And, the built environment, I think we're all aware of this, but the built environment has a major role to play in the transition to decarbonization. I think, we're all probably pretty familiar with DOE's estimates that home and buildings in the US account for about 40% of our nation's total energy use and 70% of electricity use. And, according to the UN, we have to get emissions from buildings and homes reduced by about 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050 if we even have a remote chance at staying under the 1.5 degree temperature increase target. And so again, fortunately, we've got a lot of innovative technologies and pioneering materials that are being developed, and really energy management and energy solutions ranging from low-cost solar plus storage systems, demand-side energy management, energy monitoring, load shifting technologies. That's a lot of what we're going to be focusing on today, and grid-to-vehicle technologies or grid-to-plug technologies, which I think Brad's going to touch on as well, are going to be really pivotal in this transition. So, I think that, again, in conjunction with companies like Schneider Electric, we are going to see a kind of a whole new level of insight into energy management and monitoring. And so, Brad, let's go ahead and bring you into the conversation now. Before we dive into specific technologies, I'd like to frame the discussion about energy in general. So can you tell us about the market challenges and drivers that are making energy efficiency and resilience possible when building homes these days?
Yeah, sure. And if you want to advance to that first slide, a few of those points are there. But what we see is, first of all, if we look at we think about CO2, and oftentimes we think about the driver being our industrial base and our electric generation grid. But when you look at the other end of that and what's driving the usage, 34% of those CO2 emissions are coming from housing. So you take all those housing in the U.S., over a third of that is coming from residential base, and that's only growing because to your point about some of the drivers, more of us are working from home now, right, because of COVID. And I personally really don't see that changing going forward dramatically. I think there's going to be a lot of folks that just keep working at home, or at least work at home a lot more during the week than they used to. And so that shifts that energy usage that you used to have at the office is now occurring at your home. And now that's a personal impact to that person, but also the opportunity cost, because oftentimes that home was empty during the day, and through smart thermostats and otherwise, we're able to set back that HVAC system, for example. Now that goes away because people are occupying their home more around the clock, right? And so that's one of the drivers that is going to make people really say, well, wait a second, my energy bill, I'm working from home, all of a sudden my energy bill's going up, what's going on? And then it's going to dawn on them what's happening. And then on top of that, if we move from that need for sustainability and efficiency to resiliency. So now within residential base, we're talking about, it's no longer not being able to watch your Netflix shows. It's about being able to work. So when your power goes down, you can be in a really bad spot. So more and more people, as a result of the fires that are causing the electric grid in California to be shut down, or to be proactively shut down to prevent the fires, or the strange spring storm that we saw in Texas, or hurricanes that we continue to see along the Gulf Coast or the Northeast Coast. All those things are driving more and more need for resiliency. So I think, even out, we like to think about this being concentrated on California, but really this is, when you look at the resiliency need, this is something that really starts to spread even further across the nation, and not just in states like California and others that have really high energy costs.
Indeed. Thanks, Brad. And just to kind of corroborate what you're saying, I live in southeastern Colorado near Telluride in the mountains and in a very rural area. And a few months ago, we got our RAG from our local utility, and the executive director of the local utility had written a note in there saying, look, as the risk of wildfires and actual wildfires increase, just be prepared for those rolling blackouts and brownouts like we're seeing in California, because they are inevitably spreading across the country. So I know my community is thinking about grid resiliency and what can we do to increase that resiliency at a community scale or a house by house scale. So these are definitely important important discussions to be having in general. Mary, if you can advance to the next slide, please. So let's talk about millennials, Brad, because they have seized the top influencer position in the housing sector. They're spending more money on buying and remodeling homes than any other audience segment. They have a totally different set of values and decision-making drivers. One point of data that just came from a recent survey that we did through our Cognition Smart Data division is that over half of the millennials that we surveyed said that corporate sustainability and ESG was their #1 purchase driver when making decisions about product purchasing, more than performance and quality and price, and that's never happened before. So just sharing that to indicate, the shifting set of values that are placing new expectations on building professionals, on manufacturers, and really on innovation itself. They're also really looking for, energy efficient, resilient, intelligent, connected, net zero electric homes now. And again, all of our data corroborates that. So talk to us a little bit about, millennials and some of the preferences that you're seeing and how they're impacting, frankly, some of the innovation and decision-making that you're making at Schneider Electric.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we work very closely with a lot of builders, and we're seeing it on the builder side, and they're seeing that millennial buyer coming in. And, I think, first of all, the change that I've seen, I'm in my early 50s, and I remember buying my first house and talking to my friends. It was the first question anyone always asks, how many square feet do you have, right? That's not what the millennial buyer is looking for. It's not the first question they ask. They ask things about, well, how smart is your home? How efficient is it? Who did you buy it from? And what is their corporate purpose? And are they sustainable? Are they building the home, first of all, with sustainable materials? And now the next phase of that is turned into, is the home sustainable from an operational standpoint, right? So they're looking for, am I going to be able to minimize my carbon footprint? And oh, by the way, along the way, I'll save some money as well. And that's really unique. And you're seeing that pop up more and more, to the point that, it's no longer the smaller local regional builder that has already decided to differentiate along that green building methodology. You're seeing some of the top builders now are moving in that direction, right? And they're seeing that at their level as well, and saying, we as a top 10 builder need to make a move in this direction because the buyer's expecting that.
Absolutely, we're seeing that same thing. And a couple of points of reference. One, we're actually talking with some of our builder and developer friends and colleagues, and actually working on some community scale projects where they're trying to go all electric, and local municipalities or utilities are actually charging them a fee not to use gas infrastructure. So certainly that's a kind of a change and a hurdle that I think we're all going to have to get around. Fortunately, that's not everywhere, and those builders and developers, frankly, are choosing to build in different municipalities that don't have that obstacle. But then another point of reference that I think is interesting is we have a lot of engagement with the millennial target audience, and when we have discussions and focus group and networking sessions with them, pretty much all of them, in every discussion that we have, they talk about healthy home, they talk about energy management, intelligent homes, like you say, set of questions they're asking. But the other thing that we've really seen is that they're saying, we don't want to burn gas in our house. We don't want it for water heating. We don't want it for cooking. They're like, why would we burn gas inside of our house? Like, that makes no sense. So I think it's a whole different mindset. So Brad, if we go to your next slide, and this kind of dovetails into the next piece of conversation here, talk to us a little bit about, kind of electricity prices and kind of the fossil fuel base, kind of the phase out of fossil fuels and the adoption of renewables as we move to greater electrification of everything, buildings, vehicles, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah, so actually, I'll start on the right side with the energy costs. I probably should have designed this the other way around. But anyhow, as you'll see, going all the way back to 2004, we're on a steady increase of the cost of electricity. It's gone up almost 50% since 2004. And if you just look at the trend line there, there's nothing to indicate, much variance there. It's not going to change. And when you look then to the left side and you see, the fuel base that we're using to generate our electricity, fortunately, we've seen a big shift from coal at 53% in 1990 down to 23% as of 2019, and probably even a little lower as of 2021, and a move to, but an increase in natural gas. So yes, it's a fossil fuel, but you look at that, at least you're going from something worse to something slightly better, right, from a natural gas standpoint. But then you move down and look at the renewables, we've gone from 2 to 11%. And I think obviously that's going to continue, and natural gas will probably plateau and begin to decline over time. So, but at the end of the day, the changes in that migration that we make through the fuel sources we use to provide, to generate electricity is only going to add fuel, if you will, to that price increase. But more importantly, I live in the Nashville, Tennessee area, and for now, my rate is still a flat rate. It's a pretty low rate from a kilowatt hour standpoint. But you look at states like California, where the average is 24 cents a kilowatt hour at the 8, so it's 3 times as much. But on top of that, while I'm paying 8 all the time, in California, places like San Diego, that can spike up to 55, 56 cents a kilowatt hour based on time use demand, right? And so now consumers are going to be faced with not only overall is the price of electricity going to go up, but more and more states are going to be facing time of use demand rates going forward. And that is going to add a tremendous amount of complexity to the home, right? So now you're no longer going to be able to just run your dryer whenever you want. Well, you can, but you're going to pay maybe 56 cents a kilowatt hour to do it, or your dishwasher, etc. And you're going to be looking for, ways to keep your life as simple as it was when you were just paying 8 cents a kilowatt hour all the time, to now, okay, how do I maintain that simplicity without having to be the facility manager of my home, right? And having to figure out, well, when a rate's going to be low enough for me to run my dryer and things like that. So that's going to drive people crazy to the point of saying, oh, I want solar, I want a battery, so that I can do those things off grid when the time use rate is really high, right? And so I think that's going to be a real a real driver, if you will, for people to say one source of electricity is no longer valid for me as a user. So take that plus the resiliency issue. Now you get two major factors that are going to drive people to say, yeah, I either a generator or preferably a solar and battery. I need that.
Absolutely. Well, and it really helps kind of justify that decision making when you look at full cost as opposed to just upfront cost, right? So if you're paying higher rates for electricity and having higher utility bills on an ongoing monthly basis, and then you can look at how to offset that with a solar plus storage system, whether you're doing an upfront purchase of that or some kind of a, power purchase agreement, a PPA, or some other kind of creative financing. All of a sudden, with these rising electricity costs, that equation changes and the ROI and payback period changes.
Yeah, you bring up another good point. For instance, in Texas, in the deregulated market there's something like 140 different electricity providers in the state of Texas, and they all have a number of different electricity plans you can sign up for. And if you add up all their plans that they have, there's over 2,400 electrical plans to select from in the state of Texas alone.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That in of itself brings a whole new complexity and frustration for consumers. How in the world do you possibly optimize and find the best plan? Well, part of that will be, some of the things we're going to talk about here later is having a connected energy solution that shows you the granularity of not only how much total energy you're using, but down to what's using it and when you're using it, because that data is going to be instrumental in a deregulated state like Texas to be able to figure out, okay, based on my exact usage profile of when, not only how much I use per day, but when I use it and what I use it for, this is the best plan for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. So Mary, let's go to the next slide, please. I think some of this resolves itself on a long-term scale with respect to at least the clean energy and decarbonization part, because I know right now that, solar is the least expensive form of retail energy, kind of on average across markets across the country. And wind is the least expensive wholesale form of energy right now. And I think ultimately as the grid gets cleaner, then too does our kind of buildings in general and energy use. But, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem of this antiquated grid and transmission issues. Obviously, if we're looking at, decentralized infrastructure with either, home or building or community scale solar, that's a little bit different. But Brad, talk to us, briefly about, just the grid infrastructure and why that kind of impacts and affects this whole discussion as well.
Yeah, so really the point of this slide is just to give everyone a sense of, how defragmented or how decentralized our grid is, and by nature of that, how complex it is. And then just, it was even though I put this together, it was still astonishing to me, even though I've been at Schneider 28 years, to look at these numbers and see that the average age of the installed base is over 40 years, and 1/4 of the grid is greater than 50 years old. So now imagine you have these 19,000 generators of electricity across, and it's about 3,500 utilities that have those generators, right? And all these substations. Imagine trying to get that number of utilities with this amount of infrastructure, 19,000 generators, 55,000 substations, 642,000 miles of transmissions line, just the transmission lines, and over 6.3 million lines of the distribution line from that substation to actually to your home. Imagine trying to figure out how to modernize that with renewables and otherwise to make our grid more sustainable and more resilient. And that, again, this is going to be a huge driver of why consumers just say, you know what, it's going to be easier if I just have some solar and a battery and maybe a generator for emergencies, and just because the grid's never going to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a big issue here. And if we here at Schneider, we're hoping that the infrastructure plans from the federal government are going to include a lot of possibilities for driving some of this update. But even if you start now, you're talking, this is a 20 to 30 year effort to modernize the grid.
Yeah. And, on the next slide, you have some information about codes and standards, which, obviously are going to play a role as well with respect to enhancing energy efficiency in the built environment. So can you talk a little bit about codes and standards and, just how that comes into play?
So from a codes and standards standpoint, obviously we see California leading the way with the Title 24 requirements, which led for solar on every new house. And now if it goes through final approval, that Title 24 code in California is actually going to require that all homes are what we call battery ready. And the implication of that means that a single load center panel, every house will have to have two. It'll have to have a main panel, and it'll have to have the backup panel with those circuits separate from the main panel, so that when a homeowner decides down the road to add battery, and the home is ready for that and won't require massive tearing up of stucco and drywall and wiring through the walls and whatnot. It'll be more future proof, if you will, for the addition of a battery, right? And I think you're going to see those kind of things eventually start to spread across the states. Of course, at the federal level, still have federal tax rebates for solar, and those have been extended for years. And then on the East Coast, we're starting to see a state like Massachusetts starting to consider net zero standards for new buildings. I've even heard of some of that in your state there, Sarah, of Colorado. I think Fort Collins is starting to consider how they can move to net zero, I want to say by 2030 as a city. And then even, as a global company, we've seen in Europe, there's places in England where they're simply saying, okay, any new buildings have to be net zero. You can't pull from the grid now. Yeah. Right. They're just going to cap what buildings are on the grid. And if you want a new building, it's going to have to be off grid. Yeah. Yes. We're starting to see that as well, where, there are cities, like Ithaca is another example that, has recently announced some pretty aggressive targets to electrify all buildings throughout the city, I think by 2030. And we are starting to see that more and more here. And, I think, again, it's a very exciting time because soon homes and buildings and entire communities will become mini microgrids and virtual power plants and be able to shift loads among the homes in a community or the structures in an office park, say, before that energy even hits the grid. So there will be some, optimization on a decentralized and localized scale. Mary, let's go to the next slide, please. And of course, all of that, enhances, kind of power stability and reliability, which, as you said earlier, Brad, is paramount, not just with kind of the antiquated grid infrastructure, but natural disasters like wildfires and superstorms, which are taking out, grid infrastructure with increasing frequency. And so, can you tell us a little bit about, the homes of the future and, how they are going to ultimately become more electric and more digital and what that looks like? Yeah, for sure. So I think you're starting to see in many some states like California, Colorado, and others where they're saying, it has to be all electric. There will be no natural gas infrastructure even put in as part of the overall infrastructure of the community. So, that in and of itself has a lot of implications, right? So no gas water heating, no gas cooktops, no gas dryers, and those are big users. So you're talking about 240 loads there, at least for your dryer and your cooktop that have heavy demand for electricity. And so one of the things you're going to see is that this is going to have an impact back to the utility. So the utilities can say, oh, gee, we're used to only running infrastructure for 200 amp services to a house. If you now have an all electric house plus add an EV to it, you're pretty much going to have to probably go to a 400 amp service. Well, that sounds like, okay, so now I just have to have a 400 amp panel in the house. How bad can that be? The panel's not that bad to go to a 400 amp panel, but the transformer has to be able to service a 400 amp panel in a 400 amp community, so on and so forth, right? So it has a ripple effect through that entire grid. So this is going to further drive for utilities to, especially when we're talking about infill situations, how can we take a home that previously wasn't all electric, make it all electric, and keep it on a 200 amp service? You're going to have some smart, connected, and digital infrastructure in the home that says, okay, I'm intentionally going to allow this home to be wired for more amperage than the service can provide. So the only way I can manage that is I have to make sure not everything can be on at the same time, right? So you're going to have systems in the home that force the homeowner again to make some trade-offs that says, oh well, I want to charge my EV and I'm going to cook dinner in the oven. I'm going to do some stuff on the cooktop, and oh by the way, I'm going to run the oven. And your system's going to say you can't do all that.
Great,
right?
thank you. Yeah, and interestingly, we're just going through this with one of our demonstration projects, the Revision House Scottsdale that we're doing with Steve Easley. I know that we're going to have the opportunity to work with you on this, but Steve's trying to take this older home in a nice community in Scottsdale, all electric, and we are having problems with that transformer. And fortunately, we're going to find some solutions partly through the deployment of your technologies. But we're in a little bit of a Wild West frontier days now, where we are kind of seeing some of these hurdles and obstacles. Actually, moving to the next slide, I want to be cognizant of time, Brad, and move through because I know there's a bunch of great information here. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of some of these challenges that we need to overcome with respect to sources of electricity and electrical infrastructure, and how we can surmount those challenges?
Yeah, so if you want to, I'm not sure which slide you're on, Sarah. Are you on the
more connected devices? More connected
devices.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So just real quick, the point of this that we're trying to make is if you look at all the connected devices that we have today, those through 2017 and even up to now have been largely around a little bit around the security solutions, right? Simply Save, August Gorlox, things like that. But mostly entertainment, right? What we project going forward, when you see that jump from 31 to 75 billion, that big jump is going to be the smart devices around, quite frankly, the operational part of the home, whether it's the electricity, the water, so thin or Mullen water solutions, the digital connected solutions we're talking about for the electrical system, and those are no longer about entertainment. This is about the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? The basics.
Yeah.
And because of that, these devices that were more or less maybe more for entertainment are going to become more mission critical to the home.
Great. And then the next slide, we talk about a single source of electricity for a home as an outdated concept. So you want to riff on that a little bit?
Yeah. So what, really the point of this is that if we think about, up till now, we pretty much had one source of electricity coming to most homes in the form of the electrical grid from the utility. And what we here at Schneider are looking at is you really have up to, 5 different sources. You have your grid, you have your solar, you have your battery, you have potentially a generator, as well as a two-way EV. So that, for example, the recently announced Ford F-150 Lightning pickup truck, which will allow you to use that pickup truck essentially as a generator to charge your home when you need to. And so if you think about that, then the old electrical distribution system of the past has to change. If it doesn't, it begins to look a lot like the next slide, right? So this is what we're stuck with today, which is this wall of gear. The load center there in the kind of the third one down, you got your backup panel, you got your inverter, maybe you have a battery. And then if you also want a generator, then you've got that on the outside of the house here to the right. So all of a sudden, you're taking up a lot of space. You got a lot of cost, both in material and labor here. And it's just not very aesthetically pleasing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Mary, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, so if you tap that again, you'll see an illustration of, again, that kind of that complexity that we're talking about. And, what we're envisioning here with the Energy Center is something that consolidates that down to more or less one enclosure. And then with our partnership with Solar Edge, we'll have a solution here in the next 3 to 6 months that will allow a quick connect of the Solar Edge inverter into the Energy Center. So that just quick connects into the back of the Energy Center, which sits on the outside of the house. The inverter's on the inside of the house. So it's connecting maybe through a garage wall, and then a battery, and that's it. So all of a sudden then you get something that looks, a lot more aesthetically pleasing. But more importantly, what this does is, for example, we were talking about earlier with a backup panel being required in California and therefore having to have 2 panels. If you use this, you won't, because the backup panel is inside the main panel. Mm-hmm. So we've consolidated all that to make it simpler at the time of installation, but also just to future-proof the home. So this is ready, obviously, for the grid, set up to integrate your solar and or battery and or the generator and or the EV, right? And make that all much simpler, and really just to assume whether the home at the time of construction has all those sources, it will sometime in the future. So you might as well build it and be ready for it.
Great. And Mary, if you could switch to the next slide, please. Great.
Yeah, so just real quick, touching on a few of the major points. Again, reducing a lot of labor and material. So getting rid of all that conduit and all the labor associated with bending that on site and lining up all those materials. And then by, having this connected through an app so that you can see in real time what's going on. And that in and of itself begins to change people's behavior, because they can really see in real time at a granular level down to the dishwasher, the coffee maker, the TV, HVAC unit, the washer, the dryer, separately in real time, when it's on and how much energy it's using. And then you add on top of that the ability to control those. Now you start to give that end user a simple way with an app that's going to reach out to you and say, hey, this is going on or this is going on, and give the user a very simple, what do you want to do solution inside the app. Then you begin to go back to those simple days of a flat rate that you get to use all the time, right?
Right, great. And so, Mary, can you go to the next slide? Brad, I actually think we're a slide or 2 off here. I just want to make sure that we show on the next slide, where it's going to show the Energy Center. So we're kind of back to your points about reducing labor and materials, ensuring continuity of power, during outage, the load shifting piece, and then kind of the integration of all of those pieces together. And then, Mary, one more slide. If we go to the digitally enabled residential energy system.
Yeah, so this is really just to help visualize what we here at Schneider are calling our grid to plug approach. So if you think of it, the grid coming into your main service panel, so that's the panel representing kind of your access to the grid, but all the way down to the plug. So Schneider is the #2 wiring device manufacturer in the world. We've now launched a solution as of April this year. And the unique thing about our smart connected devices is that they do anything and everything you would expect a Wi-Fi or Z-Wave device to do. But more importantly, those are meters. So they're also metering at that individual usage level, whether it's a dimmer, a light switch, but more importantly, an outlet that you may have appliances and other things plugged into. And it's not only measuring that and contributing that all back to one app ecosystem, but it's also providing you discrete control down to the plug level, right? So really, kind of giving you that complete grid to plug approach, and start to think about, the load center, your circuit breaker box, and your light switches and outlets, which used to just be connected by copper, maybe aluminum, but are now digitally connected, and it's now not just disparate parts and pieces. It's one ecosystem, and the data that we can begin to derive for that. I mean, I really think that the electricity flowing through the home, through the load center, through the devices, is the last bastion of data for us to harvest from home, and what we can begin to do with that, both from an energy management control standpoint, but also predictive maintenance, and just simple peace of mind of what's going on in your home when you're not around. It's massive. It's a massive opportunity.
Indeed. And, this is a simple and elegant system. Mary, if you go to the next slide, you can see the indoor and the outdoor view, very streamlined, not all of the, complex and multiple systems and devices, that we showed on a couple of slides ago. So that's good engineering. So thank you for that. I know we have a couple more complex installations going on at a few of our demonstration projects, which are unfortunately not quite this elegant. But if we go to the next slide, we've talked a bit about, grid to plug, and I've been really impressed with what I've been reading and seeing with respect to some of these, grid to vehicle and grid to plug solutions in terms of having, bi-directional chargers that can enable, whether it's a home or a vehicle, to store that energy, for, kind of peak load optimization, whether that's time of use, based on time of use pricing, or just general stress on the grid. You've talked about this a bit, but, can you talk a little bit more just about how kind of grid to plug and grid to vehicle technologies are really going to help solve for some of our kind of grid overload related challenges?
Yeah, I think from a grid to EV or EV to home solution, that was something originally EV manufacturers frowned upon because of the concern of stressing the battery over time. But now with better and better technology, we're seeing manufacturers like Ford and eventually Tesla, they're going to say, yeah, you can use these vehicles to be a generator, right, for the home. So when you think about that, and a consumer is going to be able to say, well, I need a car anyway, so why not buy one that can also be a generator? That brings a lot of efficiency for the average consumer to be able to solve two problems with one solution. And in our view, and what we've designed into this energy center and our grid to plug solution is, again, to assume that's going to happen, and therefore engineered in such a way that when you do get that that F-150 Lightning and the 2-way charger, your house is future-proofed, and it's not going to disrupt the home and cost you nearly as much as it would without it to integrate this into your home if you're doing it, after the fact.
Yeah, exciting. So next slide, and I think this is one of our final slides. Brad, can you talk about any specific examples that you're working on?
Yeah, so we've been longtime partners with KV Home, and they have standardized on that complete grid to plug solution that we saw in the previous slide for all 128 homes that they're building in the Sundance Park Circle community just north of San Diego. So we're about probably 50 or 60 homes in, about halfway there. It's going very well. We're at a stage now of moving into the next phase of actually working with consumers to get feedback on what their experience is like. So we're looking really forward to that part of the journey with KV Home. But, these are, and we have a number of other opportunities that are starting to pop up as well. So I guess, the main point here is what I showed today isn't vaporware. It's not something that'll be here in 5 years. It's here today. And we've got, builders like KV Home that are seeing the value in it and are putting it in as a standard solution, not an option upgrade. It goes in every house.
Great, thank you. And I know we're looking forward to working with you on a couple of different demonstration projects and communities. So thank you for that. And Mary, let's go to the next slide. I think this is our final one. Brad, I have a question that I didn't prep you for ahead of time, but can you tell us about what's coming down the pike, what's in the pipeline, and what are you kind of most excited about in terms of certainly Schneider Electric innovation, but just broad. This question is meant to be even broader than Schneider Electric. Like what gets you really excited about where we're heading?
Well, here's what I would say to that is I'm not an engineer. I've just pretended to be one for about 28 years at Schneider Electric. I grew up, my dad worked for IBM, and so I was always into computers. And so over my career at Schneider, I have envisioned for the longest period of time that this electrical distribution system would become an IoT device or an ecosystem for the home, and it's happening. And we've launched lots of different products and things, and you launch them, and it's like, will this really stick? Will this be something that is really going to take off? What I'm excited about, beyond what we're doing at Schneider Electric, what I'm excited about for this space, this is not something that's going away. This is here to stay. You're gonna, we happen to be leading the way with a real tangible solution, and we plan to continue to do that. But you're gonna see our industry follow in these steps because it's inevitable. And so that to me is very exciting, not only for the commercial, obviously the commercial success it'll bring our company, but more importantly, it's going to change people's lives, and it's going to change our planet for the better. And it's really, I think for a lot of people who say, well, what can I really do when we talk about reducing my carbon? How do I reduce my carbon footprint? This is going to be something that we can really give to people and say, here's how you can do it, and here's how you can do it without disrupting your life, and actually bring value in terms of keeping it simple as electricity pricing gets more complicated. And then the other part of this to me that's exciting is, quite honestly, the capability for predictive maintenance. And so in my own home, we're actually beta testing this. My house is a test home. And I've been able to detect my HVAC system was going to shut. It was about to break down. I detected that before it happened. So I did not incur any sort of service disruption. I actually called my wife from a trade show floor in Las Vegas to tell her she had left the refrigerator door open at our house here in Nashville, right? So, those type of things, those are the things that beyond just trying to be more sustainable and resilient, they're just going to bring some simplicity to people's lives and actually start to create what I would call almost a self-healing home.
Mm.
And so that's me.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Yeah, indeed. This is incredibly exciting. And, certainly I think these types of advanced technologies are going to play a major role in, the full scale electrification and kind of net zero everything element of buildings, which, as I mentioned earlier, it's estimated that if all buildings were net zero embodied carbon, and that includes manufacturing, transportation, construction, operation, and end of life phases, that we could reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in the US by more than 50%. And while the stat that I mentioned earlier, the UN avows that emissions from buildings must be reduced by 50% by 2030 and 100% by 2050 if we're going to hit our kind of climate goals. Unfortunately, we have a long road to travel because not even 1% of existing buildings are considered to be net zero carbon today. But these technologies will play a big role in that. And I think with that, Mike, I'd like to hand it over to you. I know you've got a couple of questions from attendees. So let's take another 10, 15 minutes and maybe answer a couple questions.
Most definitely we can. And I want to make sure that the attendees know they can go ahead and send in their questions now by the questions box. We're going to get to some that have already been sent in. So we have kind of a back-to-back questions from Armando. Brad, so let's take this one at a time. The first one, which may be on other people's minds too, is concerns with privacy and also hacking. How do clients avoid those two concerns?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that is a big concern. One of the things that we're doing is when you look at the electrical distribution system, it has now a lot of different functions, right? So one, we've been talking a lot about the energy management and control. But the other part is, it still has to protect the electrical distribution system, the wiring of the home. It's got to protect the people from being electrocuted, right? So the ground fault technology, the arc fault technology, the thermal magnetic overload technology, all those things have to be maintained. And those things for the property and life safety of the home will remain native to the panel, right? And so that those essential parts of protecting the home, family, will not be dependent on any sort of cloud-based connection or services. Those things are native to the house. Obviously, when we start talking about the energy management and monitoring, that's cloud-based, and so security is very, very important for us at Schneider. It's something we're really good at because we have to do this for lots of different things. Federal buildings, data centers, banks, etc. So those services that we're doing, we take that extremely seriously and take those learnings and levels of security that we have in those other segments and are bringing that to the residential space so that, the likelihood of this solution ever being hacked is as low as possible.
Okay. And then the other question he had.
I would give you, just in our own Wiser Energy solution, if you call into our customer service, they will ask you permission to look at your data every time that you call in. There is no presumption that we have a right to look at your data.
Okay.
The other part of it is we're not commercializing your data, so we don't have an incentive to look at it.
Well,
I
that's
would on the topic of hacks. I mean, look, the grid itself is hackable now. I think we've seen concerns about that and some probing at that already. So that's a concern I think that's continually being addressed across the board, whether it's Schneider Electric or the utility scale or anything. So I think that's something that's always being looked at anyway. But I do want to get to his other question, which was he had a client, because Armando's a builder, he had a client who he had an all-in-one system installed. It was security, it was AV, it was HVAC, lighting, appliances, you name it. Once the system goes down, the whole house goes down. And so since then, Armando is saying that he recommends all the systems to be installed individually to segment them out, separate them, and that way you don't have that kind of situation. But can you give us your thoughts on the two different strategies that he's talking about here?
No, I see what Armando is saying. You know, we kind of look at the electrical distribution and control as one of those subsystems to the house. And we try to take an agnostic approach, and we work with, third-party companies to say, okay, if you want to bring that into, the overall control of the home, whether that be like, with a company like Alarm.com or Control4 or something of that nature, sure, we'll be a subsystem to that. We don't have an aspiration to be the system or the only system for a house. Our goal is to be good at what we do, which is electrical distribution and control, now monitoring, right, as a subsystem to the home. But yeah, I fully understand where Armando's coming from.
Yeah. Got a question from Joe. He wanted to know what is proposed for powering backup generators.
So, today those backup generators are oftentimes multi-fuel, right? So they can be gas, they can be propane, they can be gas. So if you're using a traditional generator, that's what they're going to be. But I think, with the move toward things like the Ford F-150 and battery walls, if you will, as the prices for those things come down, you're going to see a move to the idea of, well, traditional fossil fueled generators can go away, and we can start thinking of battery walls as our generator, if you will.
All right. Moving on to a question from Rob. He wanted to know if these smart panels, do they work well in retrofit applications? I mean, we talked a little bit about, trying to electrify an existing home for before and some of those challenges that you face, but can you zero in just on the smart panel part of it?
Yeah, as far as we started with the Energy Center, and this version of it is optimized for in California because of the utility requirements there, with that all-in-one design where the meter and the load center are all together. That's just a traditional 400 amp enclosure. There's nothing special about it except for it's painted white. But could you retrofit that? Yeah, it'd take you a little extra work to retrofit that, but we're in our product roadmap as we go into 2022 and 2023. You'll see us introducing specific retrofittable solutions that are even easier to retrofit into a home, and to have solutions that hopefully by the end of next year, we'll have a solution that is viable in every state of the country. The challenge there being you have over 3,000 different utilities. They all have, or groups of them all have their own standards as to meter configuration, and is it part of the panel, or is it separate from the panel? Is it ring? Is it ringless? Is it meter bypass or not? All those different variables. Hundreds of thousands of iterations. So we're working to roll that out as we go forward.
Okay. So got a handful of questions left on the docket, so I want to make sure to put out a final call for questions from our audience. I actually had one for you, Brad. We've spent some time together on the Housing 2.0 program, and we've had a chance to talk about some of the things that Schneider does and the application of those services and products to the new way to do housing. But I guess I've got one question that I haven't asked you yet in that, and that is, currently the grid is maintained by trained professionals who are on staff. Are there concerns with the maintenance side of all of this if and when this gets shifted down to the individual residents or the facility level, especially if those property owners say, I want to go off grid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Concerned that they want to go off grid. Is that the question?
No. It was are there concerns with the maintenance side of things? Something goes wrong, you go, oh, who do I call? Right now, you've got, if you're tied into the grid, you've got something with supply. There's trained professionals. You call them, hey, I've got a problem. They come out, trucks, and fix it. But what about when it gets down to that individual property level, and the maintenance maybe falls on the property owner?
Yeah, so I think, between the National Electric Code and the requirements electrical contractors have to follow standards set by utility, I have a little concern about homes being maintained properly with alternate sources. Now, I think but if you extend that and you go to the point of an off-grid home, all of a sudden that changes, right? Because now the utility is not involved, and you're only talking about, meeting, some electrical code standards, and that could become, maybe a little bit more concerning on a go-forward basis.
We have a question from Deborah. She wanted to know who typically purchases your system when it comes to single-family residential. Is it the PV installer? Is it the electrician? Is it the general contractor or the builder? Is it the homeowner? So can you talk a little about who you see or who you are seeing as your customer base?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because traditionally, we sell through electrical wholesale distributors like a Gray Bar, CD, etc., to an electrical contractor. But this energy center solution really starts to mash up the electrical side with the solar side. And so we're working more and more to look at those channels to the solar installer, because this is going to force the solar installer and electrical contractor to work together in a much closer way. The good news is, in the example I shared earlier with KD Home, we found that actually has gone relatively well between the solar installer and electrical contractor. But in that model, the electrical contractor has bought the panel, and the solar installer has worked in conjunction with the electrical contractor. Now, I think going forward, what we're going to see is I was on another symposium not too long ago, and it was around smart home, and they were talking about low voltage, right? So you got low voltage, you got electrical, you got solar, and someone said, well, as a builder, how do I manage all this? Because at the end of the day, this all has to be, digitally tied back together for one user experience for the homeowner to use. And I said, well, hire a contractor that does all of it. And I think you're going to see more and more contractors that are starting to hybridize across low voltage, electrical, and PV, so that they can provide that total solution, not so much from the hardware standpoint, but at the end of the day, the commissioning to bring it all together so that it's just easier, right? If you have one person that's installed it all, they are incented to make sure it goes well so that it can be commissioned easily, because they're the one and only one doing it. So I think you're going to see that over time.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Certainly having almost like a consultant mind to be able to pull from different disciplines to really service the client. That makes sense. I had a question from Rasmal. He wanted to know what ballpark, we're not going to ask you again to specifics, Brad, but just ballpark, what is the additional cost to future-proof in essence? Is there some sort of average or range on the dollars per square foot or per 1,000 square foot as a starting point for average consumers or homeowners? Is there anything out there that's published you wanted to know?
Yeah, so I think, we're working through that on a lot as we go through this KB and some other builders. But I mean, I'll tell you, this solution today is going to be about another $1,500 on in the house. Now, what I'm not accounting for and what we're studying is the time and material savings. And so I think by the time we finalize what the real time and material savings is, we're going to take a large chunk of that incremental $1,500 out of the cost of the solution. But we're working, we've done our own, in-house studies of that, but there's nothing like the real world examples. So we're working with builders like KB Home to figure that out in a more finite way.
Okay. Well, sir, I don't have any other questions for him, and neither does our audience. So I wanted to go ahead and, if it's okay with you, just kind of wrap this up.
That's a
great. No, I really appreciate everyone's time today. And, Sarah, Mike, thanks for hosting this and taking us through this today. I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, Brad, for joining us today. Thank you to all of our attendees, and Mike and Mary, of course, thank you as always for doing such a great job making these webinars happen. But Brad, thank you for just the innovation and the vision that you and your whole team has. We're really excited to continue to hear about the advancements that you're making to help, shift us to net zero everything. So.
I appreciate that so much. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to Schneider Electric for the generous sponsorship of this webinar. This is the last Green Builder Media webinar of 2021, but we're so glad that you joined us throughout the year, and we look forward to bringing you many more informative and thought-provoking webinars in 2022. Stay tuned to your inbox for more information on those. Until then, have a safe, peaceful holiday season and a very happy new year.